Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. I thought last week's episode was pretty good. Lots of comments. When I ever seem to do inexpensive whiskey episodes of the show, they always seem to entice an awful lot of comments, and I guess it's because at the end of the day, price is quite a sensitive matter, I suppose, with regards to whiskey, and part of the reason why I don't tend to sort of bang on about price in the show, mainly because what I would rather concentrate on is the quality of the spirit. Yes, all right, from a retailer's point of view, when I have my retailer's hat on, obviously I have to sort of bring that into the equation, and sometimes I will bring that in as a point on episodes of the show. But I often find that sometimes when you start talking about money, it kind of clouds the issue somewhat, and sometimes, like I said, it's just not. I just want to basically concentrate on the quality of the spirit. Is it good? Is it maybe not so good? Why? Yada yada yada, you know. So like I said, so sometimes I will bring in price, sometimes I won't bring in price for those kind of reasons. So anyway, on to this week's episode of the show. This week's episode is a bit of a clearing out of the notebook episode, I suppose, for want of a better word, or words I should say. It's just basically I got some samples, I think it was about 3 samples, I think, from the Lady of the Glen, the last outrun, the Q4 outrun of their releases, and I thought it would just be nice just to sort of clear them out, and I got a lot of old Lady of the Glen samples knocking around, so I just thought I'd grab 3 random ones just to chuck in, just to make up a 6 basically at the end of the day. So so a big thank you to Paul from Lady of the Glen for continually sending samples. I mean, it is really nice. There are so many independents, and I guess you could say Lady of the Glen or Hannah Whiskey Merchants are exactly the same. They don't need to send out samples. They could quite happily and do sell everything they bottle, so they don't need to sort of indulge me with samples and so on and so forth. But then again, I do these, and I've done quite a number of episodes of the show on Lady of the Glen since we've been working together, and so I like to think of it as symbiotic, I suppose. Send me samples, I'll review them, decide whether I'm going to buy them with my retailer's hat on, and I will obviously review them on the show and obviously promote them, or not, as the case may be, to a wider audience, hopefully, so gets their name out and about. So as I've done numerous episodes of the show on Lady of the Glen, I don't think there's an awful lot to say, apart from let's just take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so Lady of the Glen, I'm no different from a number of the other independent bottling companies at the moment. They are indeed sort of labouring under the fetish of finishing every bloody whiskey that they bottle in some form of wine cask or whatever. So let's see if they work or not. So the first bottling we'll be looking at is a Knockdhu. A 10-year-old Knockdhu, originally matured in a bourbon hoggy, finished in virgin oak. Cask number 83, distilled in April of 2012, bottled in April of 2022 at 58.2%. Number 2 we'll be looking at is a 10-year-old Blair Athol. Originally, I don't know if it was a finish, or I think it might be entirely matured in a refill wine barrique, number 310876, distilled in September of 2013, bottled in September of 2023 at 57.7%. Bottling number 3 is a Teaninich, a 13-year-old Teaninich, originally matured in a bourbon hoggy before spending 5+ years in a profiler barrique from the J. Diaz Cooperage, cask number 721009, distilled in January of 2010, bottled in 2023. Teaninich wine finish. Yeah, okay, well, we'll see. Bottling number 4 is a Dailuaine, a 10-year-old Dailuaine, again originally aged in a bourbon hogshead and finished in a tawny port cask for 2+ years, distilled in February of 2013, bottled in September of 2023 at 59%. Penultimate bottling is a duffer. It's a Dufftown. Do you know what? You know, years ago, Dufftown regularly cropped up in the independent bottling companies lists. I haven't seen one in donkey's years. This is the first one I have seen in a long time. So originally aged in a refill bourbon hoggy, finished in an Caol Ila octave. It's 13 years old, cask number 705326B. Bit of a mouthful. Distilled in March of 2008, bottled in October of 2021 at 54.7%. Dufftown finished in an Caol Ila octave. Well, we'll see. And the final bottling of the afternoon is a Caol Ila. This is a 10-year-old Caol Ila. It spent its initial part of its life in a bourbon hoggy before being finished for 8+ months in a ruby port pipe from the Josepha cooperage in Portugal, one imagine. Cask number 316112, distilled in 2013, bottled in September of 2023 and bottled at 56.7%. So interesting range of whiskies, interesting ranges of finishes. Will they work? Won't they work? Who knows? Let's find that one out, shall we? Okay, so let's kick off with the Knockdhu. Again, another one of those sort of distilleries that doesn't really seem to sell very much of its product. Don't see it that often, and when you do, it does tend to be pricey, more so than you would expect. But anyway, let's see what the nose goes. It's a bit fainty, it's a bit young, it's a little on the raw side. There's a lot of virgin oak, you really can smell it. Toasted spice, ginger, it's almost kind of ginger nuts. I love ginger nuts, but kind of, honest opinion, the oak feels really too heavy-handed. It's kind of not really integrated. The spirit is too young. Maybe there wasn't a great deal of oak character to start off with. But I think the sort of virgin oak is just too heavy for it. It's just, yeah, awkward. Let's see what it passes like. It's a bit young, it's a bit raw, a bit fainty. There is some nice sweet barley notes initially. It does go sort of raw faintiness, barley, oak. Oak and bloody more oak. Again, it's that gingery kind of new oak. And it bitters quite hard on the finish. It's masked, the alcohol really is emphasising that bitterness. And again, it doesn't feel integrated. It's just a little bit too kind of heavy. And it's not really working for me. Let's see whether a little drop of water will kind of just calm the oak down. Although, if it, anyway, yeah. Yes, it does that, but it kind of leaves the spirit a little bit exposed now. And there's a little bit of honey there, a little bit of sweetness, but it's too young. It really could have done with more time in a sort of a less active American oak cask, and then maybe if you wanted to finish it in the virgin oak, just a shorter finish, because like I said, the oak just doesn't feel particularly integrated. There's a little bit of citrus. It's a good spirit. You can smell it's a great spirit. I just personally think it was bottled too soon. It should have been left for longer. Anyway, so pass on that. It's a little better balanced on the palate, but it's still rather young. The oak has kind of settled down a little bit. It's a little bit more creamier than sort of overt sort of virgin gingery spiciness. I still get the feeling that this was just bottled way too soon. And as we all know, yes, all right, it's a 10-year-old, but 10 is just an age. Some whiskies are ready at 10, some aren't. It's a fact of life, and that one just wasn't ready for it. That's all. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Blair Athol profile of barrique finish, or matured. If that has been matured entirely in a wine barrique, it was a very well filled, refilled wine barrique, because there's not a huge amount of colour there. So let's see what the nose gives us. And indeed, I'm not getting a huge amount of wininess. It kind of kicks off with that sort of weighty, honeyed Blair Athol character. A bit of oatmeal, yeah, real density. Classic in classic Blair Athol character. There's a little bit of toasted coconut, a little bit of red fruits, cherry, almond oil, vanilla, a little bit of sort of off sweet spice. Lovely nose, very good. I mean, this is it. This is how this is how you do wine matured or wine finished. It's all about the balance, and it's all about sort of just adding that sort of little bit of wininess and not overwhelming the spirit. And this, yeah, textbook, absolutely textbook. Let's see what it passes like. Okay, it opens up with a little bit more of the wininess, the juicy red fruit. Then we move into the sort of the honey, the vanilla, as an almost kind of grainy, kind of coconutty kind of feel that coming through on the mid palate. A little bit of quite toasty oak, some more cherry, vanilla, barley, lovely complexity. A little bit heavier on the oak on the palate, but I don't think detrimental to the spirit. You can still taste the spirit. It's a bit masked. It's a bit, the alcohol is quite noticeable. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does. Hopefully that will tame it down a bit. A little bit more distillery character. The wine has dropped off a little bit more, but it's again, I can still smell the subtle red fruits, the cherry, more honeyed now, fuller, you know, just taking the edge off the alcohol has kind of really brought forward the Blair Athol weight. Lovely, really nice. Let's see what passes right now. Like the nose, less of the wine cask, more of distillery character, more of the Blair Athol, more of the honey. Shows actually quite a good maturity. And again, this is it. It's 10-year-old. Yes, 10-year-old. Yeah, so it's a 10-year-old, but it tastes older than 10. And this is it. This is just it. 10 is just an age. It's just a number. It's how long it's been spent in the cask. Doesn't really sort of mean that it doesn't. It has to taste what a particular way. I guess we just kind of almost to a certain extent wired into sort of like, you know, what whiskies taste like at certain ages, and this just tastes a little bit older than 10. Beautifully balanced, really nicely integrated, plenty of distillery character, a little bit of wine character. Yeah, that's how you do it. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Teaninich. Right, so this is the sort of whiskey that as soon as I see it on the page, I think, ooh, light, grassy, elegant, delicate, space-eyed, whoa, bloody big wine finish. Ain't going to get much distillery character here, are we? Or are we? Let's see what the nose gives us. Always like I said, even though I might think that when I see it on paper, I always reserve judgment until I stick my nose in the glass, because sometimes you can be surprised. It's quite high toned. I'm getting plenty of the grassy kind of Teaninich character. Not particularly complex spirit wise, but there's a little bit of sort of potpourri, some chunky black fruit. Actually, it's quite elegant, and like I said, you know, first impressions when you look at it on the paper and you think that ain't gonna work, and then you stick your nose in the glass. I mean, alright, 9 times out of 10 your kind of gut feeling is correct, but every now and again you get a curveball, you know, and I am getting the Teaninich grassy character. So again, another really well balanced nose. Let's see what that's like. Again, more oak on the palate. It's got a really nice chocolatey note, actually. Sort of, yeah, chocolatey, black fruits, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of barley. Masked again, quite spicy, tongue-tingling finish. Mind you, it is 58%, so that's not a surprise. Citrus, creamy American oak. I mean, that's actually a bit more heavy on the oak, bit more oak, less about the spirit, but still, I think that's a really appealing palate. I'm hoping that we put a little drop of water with it and that will just knock back the oak a little bit. Yeah, basically lots and lots more citrus and grassiness. It's got that sort of Sauvignon Blanc, nettly kind of space ID character. And the oak, the wine cask, although it has become a little bit homogeneous, is not the right word, but it's become a bit more kind of generic wine, is sitting in the background. But you know what? Like I said, you know, I'm amazed about, you know, considering this was over 5 years in the wine barriques, or the wine barrique itself. The Teaninich character has stood up there amazingly well, which has just blown me away. Anyway, let's see what it tastes like. Palate is the same. More of that sort of grassy, citric, Sauvignon Blanc character, less wine, a little bit less complex, you could argue. Yep. But again, really nicely balanced. Just a lovely whiskey at the end of the day. Okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old Dailuaine and let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's a big old chunky nose, that is. Lot of port character, tawny, dried fruits, menthol, weighty, roasted meat, earthy, which will be obviously the distillery character, as we well know. Dailuaine is quite a big, meaty style of whiskey, and it does sort of work. I will give it that. You do get the distillery character, you do get that meaty sort of big, intense kind of Dailuaine character, the oiliness. It is working with the port, but the port is a little on the heavy side. Now I do have to say that it doesn't smell like it's 59%. It's one of these kind of whiskies where the alcohol is so well contained it is dangerous, because it doesn't smell 59% at all. Really, really well contained. Let's see what that's like. Chunky, herbal, lots of tawny fruit, quite a fair amount of malt on the mid palate. It's rich, it's dense. You can sense and feel the density rather than sort of like actually taste the sort of Dailuaine character. The port is quite on the heavy side. It is a little masked, a little spicy on the finish, a little tannic. There's some nice juicy fruit. It is kind of more in the finish end of the spectrum, but because of the sort of style of Dailuaine, the weight and the sort of meatiness of Dailuaine, it does kind of handle it, and you can feel that weight and meatiness. So yeah, okay, balance, get it. You know, it's not an unbalanced whiskey. I'm kind of let's see what a little bit of yeah, okay, so again, water drops down the port a bit, more of that sort of meaty, weighty spirit character. It's a bit simple now. Maybe it was a bit simple, you know, per se. Maybe that was again sort of like, let's finish this or shove it into a port cask because it's not the most complex of Dailuaines, and it can probably cope with it. And, well, they were right. I mean, it isn't the most complex of Dailuaines, and yes, it indeed did cope with being shoved for several years, two plus, in an export pipe. Let's see what pass on that. Like the nose. Yep, it works. It's a little bit less on the porty side now, a little bit more of the sort of weighty Dailuaine character. Not a hugely complex whiskey. So yeah, finishing it in an export pipe has certainly done it some favours. It's added a level of complexity that it didn't actually have in reality. So yeah, okay, that worked. Okay, time for a bit of Dufftown. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Interesting. Obviously kicks off with a lot of Islay character. I'm getting that sort of slightly mentholated, herbal peat, chunky honey. There's a roughness there. There's some distillery character. Okay. There's some hard barley, but it's kind of offset by the Islay cask, it has to be said. I mean, it's an octave at the end of the day it was finished in, so very, very intense. One could argue it's the best thing to do with Dufftown, either shove it in a bloody sherry cask or shove it in an Islay octave. Anything to kind of like counterbalance the distillery character, but from a technical point of view, it works. It does indeed still have some distillery character, and it does have some character from the cask, so can't argue with that, I suppose. And like I said, I think I'd rather have Dufftown slightly accentuated, possibly. I was about to say adulterated, but dear God, you can't really adulterate Dufftown, can you? Yeah, let's see what the pass like. A lot more distillery character on the palate, a lot more of that sort of Dufftown character, that lovely Dufftown character. Hard barley, no faint so, it's got that hard barley. I mean, it is what it is Dufftown. You're never going to get away from that. It's like, you know, you're never going to get away from the character of Glen or so on and so forth. It's a bit tannic, it's a bit short, it's a bit masked. Be a great name for a punk band, wouldn't it? Adulterated Dufftown. I mean, yeah, if somebody chooses that name, then royalties please for the name. Let's see what a little drop of water does to it. Does it unadulterate it, or well, anyway. Okay, yep. So more citric. A bit more hard barley. The honey is kind of suppressed a bit, as is the Islay notes. Bit of crystallised fruit. You know what? I mean, okay, it's a Dufftown. You're never going to get away from that. It is what it is at the end of the day. We all know what the character of the spirit is like, and you get the character of the spirit. well, from a technical point of view, this works absolutely amazingly. I think I kind of would prefer it neat personally, because I get more of the Ila octave. Let's see what the barrel's like. It's a little watery. Those sort of mentholated notes have become a bit like kind of cabbage. Yeah, I don't like cabbage at all. It's still a little bit tannic. Again, quite hard, slightly medicinal. It's interesting. I mean, it really is interesting just to see what an Ila sort of octave kind of does to Dufftown. Whether I would sort of want to sort of like, you know, go through an entire bottle and, you know, self-flagellate that way, I suppose, is another matter. But, you know, from a technical point of view, you know, this is the sort of thing that I'd probably be inclined to do. It's sort of like, you know, well, I wonder what happens if we do this, you know, and, you know, can't argue with it. Right, okay, so moving on to the Caol Ila. So 8+ months in a ruby port cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's an intense nose. Earthy, manurey, I mean manurey, really stinky. Almost verging on the sulphurous, it has to be said. Red fruits, camphor, iodine, pepper, meaty, porty, peaty, slightly sulphury. Great, works amazingly well. Like I said, the slight sulphury note is kind of annoying a little bit. I could have done without that, it has to be said. But, you know, overall, yeah, I mean, if you ignore that, and this is the part of the problem, I just pick up sulphur too easily. It's an annoyance, it has to be said, to a certain extent, because I'd be quite happy if this didn't have that slight sulphury note. I'd be, you know, yeah, this is meaty, porty, peaty, you know, and yeah, there's that sulphury note. Yeah, probably cask related, I would imagine. Might be spirit related, possibly, but not. I'd be surprised at 10. To be honest with you, I would have thought the oak would have kind of got rid of any sulphury notes from the spirit. Yeah, let's see what that's like. A lot of wine cars, a lot of juicy red berry fruits, port, peat, medicinal notes, bog myrtle, stringent, not hugely coastal. It's a little bit of salt, not so much of the sulphur, which is really good. It's a bit master, it's a bit chunky. It's got a nice lingering peatiness. You know, God love Caol Ila, it has to be said. Yeah, it lingers. It's not a bad palate, shall we say. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Okay, so the peat has dropped off, as has the sulphur. That, well, 50% of that is good, I suppose. As often is the case with sort of peated malts, you stick some water with it and the peat character drops off. It's a faint soapiness there, it has to be said. It's kind of not the greatest cask of Caol Ila I've ever tasted, it has to be said. Now, again, it's another one of those, well, was it sort of then shoved into an export cask because it wasn't a great cask of Caol Ila? I suspect that is probably what has happened. And this is the thing, this is why I always insist on tasting whiskies, because you just don't know at the end of the day. You know, a lot of people, a lot of independents will say, well, we're doing this because of, you know, we want to be a bit different, etc., etc. But we all know, we're not stupid, we all know that these things do happen when you buy casks and they're maybe not quite as good as you would hope they would be. You try and do something with it, and you know, when you're just sort of looking at it, you think, yeah, okay, so that's a so and so finished in this particular cask, but you just don't know at the end of the day why it's been done. So in this instance, I think it's been basically done to, you know, and well, I'll hold my hands up if I'm wrong, but in my humble opinion, it's been finished in the cask to just cover up less than perfect spirit. So that's right. Much like the nose, less port, less peat, less coastalness. It's a bit sort of, yeah, nice peppery finish, has to be said. Again, I mean, there wasn't any, I didn't really get a huge amount of sulphur on the palate to start off with, and there certainly isn't any now. There's an irony, sort of green kind of astringency right on the aftertaste now, which is a bit kind of jarring, it has to be said. So yeah, not the greatest cask of Caol Ila I've ever tasted, it has to be said. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Right, firstly, big thank you to Hannah Whiskey Merchants for the samples for today's episode of the show. Again, you kind of send me samples, you know you'll get an honest appraisal. Sometimes, you know, and I always try and see the good in everything. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Lady of the Glen, or Hannah Whiskey Merchants, for the samples for today's episode of the show. I mean, I like to think that it's been, you know, a fair appraisal. That I think the Knockdhu was good spirit, lovely spirit. I just think it was bottled a little bit too soon. Didn't initially have an awful lot of oak character, which is why it was finished in virgin oak, and the virgin oak was a little bit too strong. It just spent a little bit too long in the virgin oak. That's my opinion on that. Blair Athol, on the other hand, was absolutely spot on. And this is the thing about finishing and all this kind of stuff. It's not a science. It's kind of seat of your pants kind of stuff. It's sort of intuition. Have we left it in for long enough? Have we left it in for too long? You know, and sometimes the answer is, well, yes and yes, if you see what I mean. But I think the Blair Athol was an absolute textbook. You know, plenty of Blair Athol character, a little bit of wininess, really nicely balanced. Teaninich, again, I thought that was lovely. It was one of those sort of whiskies that you look at and you think on paper it shouldn't work. But then you stick your nose in the glass and you think, well, yeah, it actually does work. It's actually really nicely balanced. The Dailuaine, again, to a certain extent, it worked. Less about the sort of, I think it's more to do with the fact that the Dailuaine has a nice weighty, meaty kind of character, which you could feel and sense underneath the wine. Again, I don't think it was the most complex of whiskies, so it probably actually sort of worked by enhancing it in, or acing it, as Brookladdy would say, in an ex-wine cask. So in that respect, I think that really worked. The Dufftown, well, again, I mean, you can't argue that. I think from a technical perspective, it worked. You've got the distillery character, whether you love it or not, and you've got the Islay quart cask character as well. It worked, you know, funnily enough, and probably, like I said, it would be the sort of thing that I would probably do with a cask of Dufftown. On the other hand, the Caol Ila didn't work, not because of the finishing. Well, maybe it was the finishing that added, maybe it was the sulphur tainted finishing cask that sort of sulphur tainted it, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a great Caol Ila, and so, you know, it was a case of, well, let's try and rescue something out of this. And yeah, trouble is when you have a cask that's maybe not quite what you expect, unless you really hammer the damn thing with the finishing cask, sometimes the cask is still going to just come through, you know, and it's kind of like a bit like sod's law, isn't it? It's like we throw everything at it and still we get that bloody roughness or sulphurness or whatever, you know. But anyway, it was a valiant effort, and the trouble is with Caol Ila, I forget how much that was going to hop onto the shelves at, but it probably wasn't cheap, as is the case. So, you know, it was, for me, discounted probably because of, well, not because of the price, but because of the you know, the sulphuric content. So, anyway, I hope you found today's episode of the show interesting. I think it's been a really interesting episode of the show. As I say, I do love what Hannah Whiskey Merchants are doing, but like I said, with every distillery, every independent, every whiskey, love is not blind, as they say. I will not sort of blindly sort of go, yeah, you're doing everything great, you know, but I hope to think that any sort of criticism that I may make is constructive criticism. Nobody likes to be criticised at the end of the day. I don't like to be criticised, but I realise that when I put my opinions, my views out there, I'm probably going to get some criticism. I'm big enough and ugly enough to cope with a little bit of that. But anyway, that's this week's episode of The Show in the Bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. All the whiskey's gone. Better find something else to drink then, I suppose, as it is just approaching lunchtime. So all that's left to say is good afternoon, and good dramming.